Introducing Audiobook Top, your new home for the finest selection of audiobooks available anywhere.
The carriage, a lumbering behemoth of scratched lacquer and creaking joints, finally shuddered to a halt before an inn sign that hung askew, proclaiming itself the Gilded Hog, a rather ambitious boast for a structure so emphatically ungilded and profoundly rustic. Mr. Bramble, whose constitution seemed as delicate as a spun glass goblet, let out a groan that resonated with the collective weariness of their long, rattling journey from the vapors of London. His nephew, young Jury Melford, ever the observant scribe of their familial peregrinations, noted the moment with a wry curl of his lip. Another den of fleas and false promises, I dare say, Uncle Jury murmured, casting a glance at the desolate yard. The hog, gilded or no, appears to have long since been rendered for lard. Mr. Bramble merely grumbled, pulling his nightcap more firmly over his ears, a futile bulwark against the perceived ills of the world. Promised a bed and a broth, not a theater of contagion, boy. But such is the common lot of the traveler, to be gulled and gashed by every scurvy knave with a pot and a privy. His sister, Tabitha, a formidable woman whose matrimonial ambitions lent her an air of perpetual agitation, clambered out with the assistance of her maid, Winifred Jenkins, who promptly uttered a malapropism concerning the inhospitable nature of their surroundings. The evening air, cool and damp, carried the faint, distant bleating of sheep and the sharp scent of wood smoke, a country balm that usually soothed Mr. Bramble's nerves, but tonight seemed only to exacerbate his complaints. They were ushered into a common room, sparsely furnished and dimly lit by a single tallow candle, whose flickering flame barely kissed the corners of the cavernous space. Here, the hollow of the chapter's title began to assert itself, not merely as a physical emptiness, but as a certain bleakness of prospect, a low hum of want that seemed to permeate the very timbers of the place. In a far corner, hunched on a bench near a sputtering fire, sat a figure that Jury at first dismissed as merely another unfortunate of the road. A young man, barely out of boyhood, with clothes that spoke of long acquaintance with the elements and an unceasing struggle against poverty. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and he shivered despite the paltry warmth of the hearth. There was a quiet dignity to his suffering, however, that caught Jury's eye, a certain humility that transcended mere wretchedness. Mr. Bramble, having taken a seat with a sigh that could deflate a hot air balloon, had barely commenced his usual litany of grievances concerning the quality of the local ale when a faint sound, barely a breath, reached his ears. It was a whisper indeed, a low murmur of a prayer, uttered with an earnestness that cut through the cacophony of his own internal complaints. He paused, his ale mug half raised, and his sharp, discerning gaze fell upon the young man in the corner. "And who, pray tell, is that poor wretch?" Mr. Bramble demanded of the innkeeper, a stout woman with an apron that seemed to have known more spills than cleanliness. The innkeeper sighed, her ample bosom rising and falling. "Ah, sir, that be Humphry Clinker by name. A poor, honest lad, though lately fallen on hard times. Arrested on a false charge, only let out this morn, with no coin in his pocket nor kin to turn to. He hath a fever too, poor soul, and naught but a crust of bread to keep body and soul together." Humphry, startled by the sudden attention, looked up. His eyes, though clouded with illness, held a startling clarity, a profound innocence that disarmed even Mr. Bramble. He tried to rise, a gesture of respect, but a wave of dizziness overcame him, and he slumped back, a small gasp escaping his lips. It was a sound so slight, so easily overlooked, yet it resonated in the quiet room. It was the whisper of the hollow, speaking not of emptiness, but of a quiet, enduring spirit. Mr. Bramble, for all his outward cantankerousness, possessed a heart susceptible to genuine distress, especially when unadorned by artifice. He observed the lad's plight, the genuine humility in his demeanor, the lack of self-pity in his simple prayer. It was not the theatrical display of a beggar, but the quiet resignation of one who expected little from the world, yet still hoped for succor from a higher power. "A fever, you say?" Mr. Bramble mused, a new note entering his voice, one of concern rather than mere curiosity. "And no kin, no prospects." He watched Humphry, who, hearing himself discussed, offered a small, apologetic shrug, his gaze dropping to his worn boots. Tabitha, ever practical, sniffed. "Another mouth to feed, no doubt. The world is full of such ne'er-do-wells, Matthew, preying upon the good graces of those more fortunate." Winifred Jenkins, true to form, chimed in, "Indeed, madam, 'tis a regular pandemonium of poor souls, all seeking a handout." But Mr. Bramble paid them no mind. He felt a stir, a faint but insistent tug, deep within his chest. It was not merely pity, though pity was certainly present. It was something akin to recognition, a subtle vibration that resonated with a corner of his own soul, a place that often felt hollowed out by the disappointments of life. This boy, broken but unbowed, seemed to hold a shard of something genuine, something uncorrupted by the fashionable vices and artificialities he so despised. "Come here, lad," Mr. Bramble commanded, his voice gruffer than he intended. Humphry, struggling, managed to shuffle closer, his every movement betraying weakness. "What can you do, fellow? Are you fit for any honest work?" Humphrey's voice, when he spoke, was soft, almost breathy, as if reluctant to impose its sound upon the air. "I can clean, sir. I can groom horses. I can turn my hand to most anything, if given the chance. I have a strong back, though it ails me a bit now. And I am honest, sir, by God's grace." It was not a plea but a simple statement of fact, delivered without embellishment. It was this plain-spoken sincerity, this raw, unvarnished truth, that hooked Mr. Bramble. In that quiet assertion, amidst the dimness of the inn and the general gloom of their journey, a faint whisper became a distinct voice. It was the whisper of a hollow that suddenly felt less empty, a space within Mr. Bramble that, though often filled with cynicism, now seemed to open to a nascent compassion. "Fetch him some broth, woman." Mr. Bramble barked at the innkeeper, then turned back to Humphry, a strange, almost gentle light in his eyes. "And a bed, not in the stables, mind you, but somewhere warm and dry. We shall see what becomes of you, Humphry Clinker. Perhaps, by God's grace, you shall find yourself a place with us, if you prove to be half as honest as you claim." And so, the hook was set. The whisper, once faint and easily dismissed, had become a quiet understanding, a thread drawn from the depths of a humble hollow, now woven into the fabric of the Bramble family's journey. Jury Melford, observing his uncle's unusual act of spontaneous generosity, made a mental note. This Humphry Clinker, this unassuming, feverish lad, felt less like a chance encounter and more like a pivotal point, an unforeseen turning of the tide that promised to steer their expedition into uncharted waters, guided by the very whisper of a life until now overlooked. Good evening or good morning, wherever you may find yourself in this grand, bustling tapestry of existence. Pull up a chair, won't you? Settle in, make yourself comfortable. For tonight, we are not just opening a book, we are opening a portal. A gateway, if you will, to a world that is at once distant and strikingly familiar, a place where the human heart beats with rhythms we still understand, despite the centuries that separate us. Welcome, my dear companions, to Tarrytown. Now, don't go consulting your atlases, you won't find it there. Tarrytown isn't a physical place, not a quaint village with a sleepy inn or a bustling market square. No, Tarrytown is a state of mind, a quiet harbor where we dock our modern sensibilities for a spell, where we shake off the dust of our own hurried lives and prepare our imaginations for an expedition unlike any other. It's that sacred pause, that moment before the curtain rises, where the air hums with anticipation and the whispers of a story, yet untold, begin to weave their magic. Before we embark on the grand, often exasperating, frequently hilarious, and always insightful expedition of Humphry Clinker by Tobias Smollett, we must first learn to listen. Smollett, a man of sharp wit and keen observation, invites us not merely to read a narrative, but to inhabit a chorus of voices. For this isn't a story told by an omniscient narrator peering down from on high. Oh no, this is a symphony of letters, penned by a motley crew of travelers, each with their own unique perspective, their own biases, their own blind spots, and their own indelible charm. Imagine, if you will, the slow, deliberate journey of a letter across 18th century Britain. The anxious wait for its arrival, the rustle of paper, the intimacy of a handwritten word connecting distant souls. Smollett, a master craftsman, uses this epistolary form to brilliant effect, allowing us to eavesdrop, to form our own opinions, to discern the truth not from a single authoritative voice, but from the delightful clash and convergence of multiple viewpoints. It's like being given several pairs of spectacles, each tinted with a different hue, and asked to piece together the true colors of the landscape yourself. A truly modern reading, wouldn't you agree, in its insistence on subjective truth and the challenge of interpretation? At the heart of our expedition, our grumpy, ailing, yet ultimately good-hearted patriarch, Matthew Bramble. He is our anchor, even as he suffers from a seemingly endless array of ailments, both real and imagined. Through his eyes, and through his increasingly exasperated letters, we will witness the bewildering changes sweeping through Britain, the rise of industry, the burgeoning social scene, the often dubious medical practices of the day. But Bramble is not alone. He travels with his spirited romantic niece, Lydia Melford, whose youthful exuberance offers a stark contrast to her uncle's cynicism. There's her pragmatic and somewhat roguish brother, Jury Melford, a keen observer with a dry wit, whose letters often serve as a humorous counterpoint to Bramble's complaints. And of course, the formidable, perpetually disgruntled spinster sister, Tabitha Bramble, whose desperate pursuit of a husband forms one of the novel's most enduring and comical threads. Then there's the odd, honorable, and often beleaguered Scottish Lieutenant Lismahago, a character so wonderfully eccentric he seems to have stepped right out of a folk tale. This delightful assembly, this traveling menagerie of distinct personalities, forms the core of our journey. They are off on an expedition, ostensibly for Bramble's health, but truly, for us, it's an exploration of human nature itself. They will journey through England, Scotland, and Wales, encountering a kaleidoscope of characters, each more curious and illustrative than the last. We will visit grand estates and humble inns, bustling cities and serene countrysides, fashionable resorts and remote villages. And in every encounter, in every stop along the way, Smollett's sharp satirical eye will expose the pretensions, the hypocrisies, the vanities, and yes, the genuine virtues of 18th century society. But why read this now, in our own Terry town of the 21st century? Because human nature, my friends, is remarkably consistent. The social climbing, the grumbling about the state of the world, the search for love, the trials of family, the anxieties about health, the clash between generations, the often absurd pursuit of status, these themes resonate as powerfully today as they did when Smollett first penned them. We may have smartphones instead of quill pens, and motorways instead of muddy tracks, but the underlying comedy and tragedy of the human condition remains timeless. Smollett holds up a mirror, not just to his own age, but to ours. He invites us to laugh, certainly, but also to reflect on what it means to be human, to navigate a complex world, and to find our place within its ever-shifting currents. So, take a deep breath. Let the distant sounds of carriages on cobblestones, the murmur of conversations in candlelit rooms, and the rustle of old letters begin to fill your mind. We are about to join the Bramble family and their eccentric companions on a grand tour, a journey that will teach us as much about ourselves as it does about their world. The stage is set, the characters are poised, and the road awaits. Our expedition begins, not with a bang, but with the intimate whisper of a letter, a welcome to the rich, satirical heart of Terry Town. Prepare for wit, prepare for warmth, prepare for a thoroughly modern journey through a classic landscape. Chapter 1. The Spellbound Region. Listen closely, for the world beyond the well-worn paths often holds its breath, waiting for those with eyes keen enough to see and hearts open enough to feel. Our journey, like many of life's profound wanderings, commenced not with a bang, but with the gentle, rhythmic creak of carriage springs and the steady, if somewhat reluctant, clip-clop of horses' hooves. We departed from the familiar, leaving behind the comforting predictability of paved roads and bustling inns, venturing instead towards a land whispered of in hushed tones, a place known only as the Spellbound Region. The initial leagues were uneventful, a mere fading of the mundane. Hedgerows still neatly trimmed, fields still orderly in their cultivation. The air, though crisp, carried no particular scent of the unknown. Our companions within the carriage, a motley collection of dispositions, were occupied with their usual concerns, the venerable gentleman grumbling about the latest turnpike levies, the maiden gazing dreamily out the window, her imagination already far ahead of the horses, and the stern matriarch adjusting her bonnet with an air of determined displeasure, certain that only further discomfort awaited. But gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the landscape began its subtle transmutation. The trees, which had stood in civilized rows, now started to intertwine, their branches forming a thicker, more ancient canopy that devoured the sunlight. The roads, once merely uneven, became rutted tracks, winding like hesitant serpents through increasingly wild terrain. The chatter within the carriage subsided, replaced by the louder, more immediate sounds of their passage, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant, echoing cry of a bird of prey. The air itself shifted. It grew heavier, imbued with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something ancient and untamed, a perfume of moss and forgotten stones. Mist, not the light, ephemeral kind that dissipates with the morning sun, but a tenacious, milky shroud began to cling to the valleys, wrapping the distant hills in a veil of enigma. It was here, as the carriage lumbered past a particularly gnarled oak, its limbs thick as a man's torso, and its bark etched with the hieroglyphs of centuries, that the first true intimation of the region's spell made itself known. We passed through a hamlet, if one could call it such. A cluster of stone cottages, huddled together as if for comfort against some unseen menace, their thatch roofs thick with emerald moss. There was no market square, no signpost, no cheerful inn with a welcoming hearth. Only silence, a profound, almost oppressive quietude. The very windows of the cottages, small and deep-set, seemed to possess a blind, watching gaze. Not a soul was to be seen, not a child at play, not a dog barking. It was as if the inhabitants had simply vanished, or perhaps were merely holding their breath, waiting for the travelers to pass. The young lady shivered, pulling her shawl tighter, a look of mingled awe and apprehension upon her delicate features. The stern matriarch sniffed, declaring the place unfit for decent folk, no doubt imagining the various contagions lurking in the air. The young gentleman, ever the pragmatist, merely speculated on the lack of proper husbandry and commerce. But the old gentleman, our venerable traveler, leaned forward, his gaze fixed on a peculiar stone monolith that stood askew in a small, untended field beyond the hamlet. It was covered in faded carvings, too indistinct to decipher, yet unmistakably human-made and profoundly old. He grumbled, not of illness this time, but of history, of forgotten peoples, and the eerie persistence of their silent monuments. The sun, which had been a reassuring presence, now merely filtered through the dense foliage in fractured shafts, creating an ethereal glow that seemed to detach the world from its moorings. The path began to ascend, leading them higher into the mist-shrouded hills. Here the spell deepened, sounds became muted, colors softened. The very sense of direction seemed to waver, as if the land itself was subtly shifting, subtly reshaping its contours to confuse the uninvited. That night, they sought refuge in a modest, ancient dwelling, more a farmstead than an inn, yet offering meager hospitality. The fire crackled with a peculiar intensity, its flames dancing with long, restless shadows that played tricks upon the eye. The elderly woman of the house, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, spoke in a dialect so thick it was almost another tongue, yet her meaning, conveyed through gestures and a certain knowing look in her eyes, was clear enough. This land, she seemed to say, was older than memory. It held its own secrets. It listened. The air in their sleeping chambers, though swept and aired, carried the same ancient scent. The old gentleman, usually quick to complain of draughts or dampness, found himself unusually quiet, staring out at the impenetrable darkness beyond the window, where the mist clung like a second skin. The young lady, usually dreaming of romantic assignations, was beset by strange, formless visions, a haunting sense of timelessness, as if the very stones beneath her felt the weight of forgotten centuries. It was not a malevolent spell, nor a benevolent one, but simply a spell, a profound immersion in a reality separate from their own, where the past was not merely history but a palpable presence, where nature asserted its dominance over human endeavor, and where the echoes of ancient ways still resonated in the quietude. The spellbound region had begun to weave its intricate tapestry around them, drawing them deeper into its mysterious embrace. And as the first sliver of dawn painted the mist with hues of pale silver and rose, the travelers knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that they had crossed a threshold from which they could not easily return unchanged. The expedition had truly begun, not just through a landscape, but into the very heart of the country's, and perhaps their own, forgotten soul. Chapter 2. The ambitious schoolmaster Ichabod Crane, having journeyed through sundry hamlets and encountered a motley collection of humanity, it was in the sequestered valley of Greensward that my path diverged, leading me to a character whose very existence seemed a quaint anomaly. The village itself, nestled betwixt rolling hills and a winding stream, exuded a placid charm, its inhabitants generally content with their lot, save for one lanky, ambitious figure who perpetually cast his gaze beyond its tranquil borders. This was Ichabod Crane, the village schoolmaster, a man whose physical form was as unsuited to grace as his spirit was ill-content with humility. Imagine, if you will, a scarecrow animated by a spark of restless ambition. His frame was tall and exceedingly spare, his shoulders narrow, his arms and legs an ungainly tangle that seemed perpetually poised for flight. His head, small and flat on top, sat upon a long, scrawny neck, giving him an almost bird-like aspect as he peered through large, green, intellectual-looking eyes that betrayed a perpetual hunger not merely for knowledge, but for the creature comforts and social elevation he so fervently craved. His nose, a prominent and somewhat predatory hook, seemed ever sniffing out opportunities, whilst his mouth, wide and thin-lipped, was often stretched into a nervous, ingratiating smile. He arrived in Greensward some 5 years prior, bearing letters of commendation of dubious weight, one suspected, and a trunk containing little more than a threadbare suit, a handful of well-thumbed Latin texts, and a profound, almost voracious, desire to better his station. The position of schoolmaster in Greensward was one of modest standing and even more modest recompense. His salary was paid in irregular increments of firewood, vegetables, and the occasional shilling, supplemented by boarding, for a week at a time, at the homes of his various pupils. This itinerant existence, whilst financially lean, provided Ichabod with invaluable intelligence and, more importantly, access. For Ichabod was not merely a pedagogue, he was a self-appointed social cartographer, meticulously mapping the economic contours of Greensward. Each new lodging offered him a peek into the larders and parlors of the village's sundry families. He noted the quality of the linen, the richness of the stew, the gleam of the silver, and the size of the landholdings with an almost scientific precision. His conversations, seemingly innocuous inquiries about family history or crop yields, were in fact meticulous data collection for his grand design. His schoolhouse, a dilapidated log cabin at the edge of the woods, was where he held sway over a boisterous assembly of some 30 or 40 children, from the mischievous scions of farmers to the timid offspring of tradesmen. Here he was an absolute monarch, ruling with a rod of iron and a firm belief in the efficacy of corporal punishment. Yet, even in this rudimentary kingdom, his ambition manifested. He taught arithmetic with a keen eye for commerce, history with tales of great fortunes made, and Latin not for its classical beauty, but as a stepping stone to a gentlemanly profession. He drilled his students not just in their letters, but in manners, always reminding them of the decorum expected in the homes of the prosperous. But it was beyond the confines of the schoolhouse that Ichabod truly exerted himself. He possessed a passable singing voice, which he deployed with strategic enthusiasm at village gatherings, especially those hosted by the wealthier families. He could drone out a hymn with a solemnity that pleased the matrons, or warble a mournful ballad that brought tears to the eyes of younger, impressionable ladies. He was also a fount of local gossip and distant news, having gleaned fragments from travelers or by avidly perusing any stray newspaper that drifted into the valley. This made him a welcome guest at tea tables and firesides, where he would recount tales of faraway cities or interpret political skirmishes with an air of profound authority, all the while subtly evaluating the hostess's china or the host's latest improvements to his estate. His ambition, however, was not merely for comfort, but for elevation, a permanent escape from the penury of the itinerant schoolmaster. He saw marriage as his most promising avenue, specifically to a well-dowered daughter of a prosperous farmer. He would paint vivid mental pictures of himself, the master of a thriving farm, his days no longer plagued by unruly children or unpaid dues, but by the dignified oversight of fields and livestock, a good table laden with produce, and a buxom, industrious wife at his side. He would linger over these reveries, his long fingers drumming on an imaginary polished mahogany table, his eyes shining with a covetous glee. He cultivated a certain air of scholastic refinement, despite his threadbare coat and patched breeches. He would speak in a slightly pedantic tone, dropping Latin phrases often incorrectly and quoting obscure poets from memory, but sometimes out of context. This, he believed, distinguished him from the common folk and rendered him suitable company for the gentry. He was a master of the humble compliment, praising a farmer's robust harvest while admiring his sturdy barn, or commending a matron's preserves while subtly inquiring about her daughter's prospects. The truth was, Ichabod Crane was a man perpetually poised on the precipice of something grander, yet always tethered by his own awkwardness and the sheer lack of tangible assets. His ambition, though transparent and sometimes comical, was also a poignant testament to the human spirit's yearning for more than mere existence. He was a living embodiment of the rural intellectual, caught between the old world of rustic simplicity and the nascent stirrings of social mobility, attempting to bridge the chasm with a combination of wit, wile, and a good deal of unsubstantiated hope. And as I observed him, with his perpetually hungry eyes and his ungainly strut, I could not help but wonder what further strange paths his insatiable ambition might lead him down, or what grand, perhaps even ludicrous, destiny awaited the ambitious schoolmaster of Greensward. He was, in essence, a minor planet, orbiting the suns of prosperity in his small corner of the world, desperate to find a more stable, warmer trajectory. Chapter 3. The prize Katrina Van Tassel. It seems there might be a slight misunderstanding regarding the source material. Katrina Van Tassel is a prominent character from Washington Irving's beloved tale, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, not from Tobias Smollett's The Expedition of Humphry Clinker. To ensure I create the most accurate and compelling script for you, could you please clarify your intent? Would you like a chapter for The Expedition of Humphry Clinker without Katrina Van Tassel, focusing on characters and themes from Smollett's novel? 2. Or would you prefer a chapter for The Legend of Sleepy Hollow featuring Katrina Van Tassel, in Irving's style? 3. Perhaps you intended a crossover, where a character from Smollett's world encounters Katrina Van Tassel, or where Smollett's satirical style is applied to Irving's setting. Once I have this clarification, I would be delighted to weave a detailed, engaging, and suitably themed narrative for you, adhering to the requested length and style. Chapter 4. The local hero Bram Bones. The Valley of Sleepy Hollow, for all its haunting shadows and whispering pines, was not without its figures of robust, flesh and blood vitality. Indeed, the very quiescence of the place seemed to nourish, in certain souls, a particularly potent strain of boisterous life, a vibrant counterpoint to the hushed tales of spectral riders. And of these, none roared with more healthy vigor, nor commanded more universal, if sometimes grudging, admiration, than Abraham Van Brunt, or, as he was more commonly and affectionately known, Bram Bones. Bram was, without question, the hero of the country round. Not a hero in the mold of those pallid, melancholic figures of classical lore, nor yet a knight-errant in gleaming armor. No, Bram's heroism was of a more practical, a more earthy, and undeniably, a more captivating kind. He was the embodiment of local strength, a veritable Achilles of the village green, though his prowess was displayed not on the fields of Troy, but in the less sanguinary arenas of husking frolics, apple bees, and particularly the thrilling, dusty chaos of a village horse race. His very presence was a kind of guarantee, a promise of lively entertainment wherever he might choose to alight. Picture him, if you will, astride his formidable steed, Daredevil, a creature as wild and unbroken in spirit as its master, yet utterly devoted to Bram's touch. Daredevil, a black horse of immense power and unpredictable temperament, was a legend in his own right, known for his fiery eyes and the thunder of his hooves. Only Bram could master him, a testament to the young man's skill and audacious spirit. Bram himself was a figure to behold, broad-shouldered and brawny, with an air of careless triumph that sat as naturally upon him as the homespun cloth upon his powerful frame. His hair was a shaggy testament to the wind and the sun, perpetually ruffled, framing a face alight with good humor, though capable of a sharp glint when mischief or rivalry stirred within him. His laugh, a hearty, infectious roar, could be heard reverberating across the Tarrytown hills during any convivial gathering, serving as a beacon of merriment and, often enough, a prelude to some good-natured prank about to unfold. It was said, and never contradicted among the honest folk of Sleepy Hollow, that no young man in the 10 miles around could best Bram Bones in a wrestling match, nor outride him in a headlong gallop, nor, indeed, out-entertain him with a tale spun by the fireside, particularly if it involved a clever trick or a narrow escape. His exploits were the very stuff of local legend, whispered with a mixture of awe and fond amusement among the matrons, and openly admired by the strapping lads who saw in him an ideal to aspire to. Had a stranger been set down in the heart of Sleepy Hollow, and asked to point out the most prominent character, their finger would inevitably have settled upon Bram, whether he was seen leading a troop of boisterous youths on a midnight escapade to rearrange a farmer's yard, or simply leaning against the tavern door, his presence alone commanding the very air. Bram was, in truth, the unquestioned leader of a gang of choice spirits, as they were called, a group of jolly, strapping blades who, under his good-humored guidance, were responsible for most of the harmless, though often startling, pranks that lent a certain zest to the otherwise tranquil village life. It was Bram who, with a twinkle in his eye and a strategic genius usually reserved for generals, would orchestrate the unhinging of a farmer's gate on Halloween, its clatter echoing eerily in the night, or the stopping up of a troublesome neighbor's chimney flue, sending smoke billowing back into unsuspecting kitchens. Such jests, while occasionally vexing to the immediate victims, were never malicious. They were simply the overflow of his boundless energy and the outward expression of a spirit too robust to be contained by the humdrum. They were, in a peculiar way, a public service, preventing the valley from succumbing entirely to its own peaceful inertia. He was the arbiter of taste in matters of attire within the rural confines, of course, the champion of village sports, and the undisputed king of rural chivalry. No maiden's heart fluttered quite so readily as when Bram Bones, with his confident stride and captivating grin, approached her at a dance, his arm offering a sturdy, reassuring presence. He possessed that rare combination of strength and charm that made him irresistible to the fairer sex, and a friendly, if formidable, rival to any young man foolish enough to challenge his supremacy in their affections. His very glance could set a shy girl's cheeks aglow, and his deep, resonant voice could hold a room spellbound with a ghost story, though he himself was rarely prone to the superstitions that plagued others. Indeed, Bram Bones was more than just a villager. He was an institution, a living landmark in the sleepy landscape. He was the vital current that ran through the quiet veins of Sleepy Hollow, bringing color and life, a hearty laugh, and a sturdy hand to every occasion. His presence was a comfort to the fearful, for who would dare challenge a man of Bram's mettle? A challenge to the ambitious, and a source of perpetual amusement to all. He was the unchallenged, undisputed master of his domain, living out his days in a contentment born of natural superiority and universal acclaim, never having truly encountered a force that could seriously threaten his reign. Little did the good folk of Sleepy Hollow, or indeed Bram Bones, imagine that the winds of change were even then beginning to stir the ancient trees, bringing with them not a mighty gale, but a subtle, insidious draught. A new figure, an unassuming interloper, was about to drift into their tranquil valley, a figure whose very existence would, inadvertently perhaps, challenge the established order and, in time, put Bram's easy dominance to a most unexpected test. But for now, the sun shone brightly upon Bram Bones, the unyielding, good-natured hero of Sleepy Hollow, and the valley continued to hum its sleepy tune, undisturbed by the faintest whisper of impending rivalry. The king held his court, unaware that a jester, of all people, might soon arrive to upset the careful balance. Chapter 5. The fateful party. Our tale, dear friends, brings us now to the very heart of that bustling, bewildering microcosm of society known as Bath. A town, as our esteemed Mr. Bramble would oft remark, where health was sought, yet vanity was worshipped, where reputations were made and unmade with equal swiftness. It was here, amidst its Georgian grandeur, that our family found themselves swept towards an event of singular significance and evening that would prove, in the annals of their expedition, to be truly fateful. The occasion was the Grand Assembly, a weekly spectacle of fashion and flirtation, held in the resplendent lower rooms. For Lydia, our sensitive, blossoming niece, the prospect was a dizzying blend of apprehension and fragile hope. Her young heart, alas, was still captive to the memory of the elusive Wilson. A tender, unhealed wound. Mr. Bramble, on the other hand, viewed the entire affair with characteristic disdain, convinced it was nothing more than a dangerous charade, a breeding ground for affectation and moral contagion. Another evening squandered, he grumbled to Jerry as they prepared. To subject oneself to such a crush of humanity, such a cacophony of empty prattle, 'tis a penance, Jerry, a social jail from which there is no reprieve. Tabitha, naturally, was in a flurry of self-importance, her every gesture proclaiming her readiness to conquer Bath's eligible bachelors. She had donned her finest silks, a monstrous, rustling contraption, as if to wrestle an unwilling suitor into submission. She, too, harbored her own quiet hopes for alliances and fortunes. So, under a sky growing dim, they descended upon the assembly rooms. The air was thick with pomade and perfume, the rustle of gowns, the polite murmur of 1,000 conversations. Chandeliers blazed, casting dazzling light upon the sea of powdered wigs and painted faces. Matthew Bramble's initial reaction was a familiar sigh, a quiet groan, a testament to his profound discomfort with such ostentatious display. Lydia, however, was a vision, her natural beauty enhanced by the simple elegance of her gown. Her eyes, wide with wonder and fragile melancholy, drew admiring glances. It was amidst this glittering throng, this vibrant tapestry of human folly, that the threads of fate began to tighten around her. She had been separated momentarily from her uncle when her gaze, almost instinctively, drifted towards a figure near one of the grand pillars. A figure whose profile, whose very bearing, sent a tremor through her. Her breath hitched. The blood drained from her face, leaving her as white as porcelain. It was him, Wilson. Or rather, McLean. The impostor, the man who had so cruelly deceived her, yet whose image had remained stubbornly etched upon her heart. McLean, for it was indeed he, seemed to be surveying the room with brazen confidence, a rogue's gleam in his eye. But then his eyes met hers. A flicker of recognition, swiftly replaced by a cunning, predatory smile that sent a shiver of dread down Lydia's spine. He began to move towards her, slowly, a predator advancing. Lydia felt her knees buckle, a cold sweat broke out. She wanted desperately to flee, but her feet seemed rooted. Her mind raced with past betrayal and present danger. She had no time to warn her uncle. McLean was upon her. He reached her, bowing with an audacious flourish. "Miss Melford," he purred, his voice now a viper's hiss. "What an unexpected, yet delightful surprise. Your beauty, as ever, brightens even the dullest of assemblies." Lydia could only stammer, her voice lost. "Sir Mr. McLean, indeed," he interrupted, his gaze sharp. "Though I believe you once knew me by a more agreeable appellation. Has your uncle informed you of my subsequent fortunes, or misfortunes?" His tone was laced with bitter sarcasm, a clear intimation of trouble. The scene, though outwardly subdued, drew curious glances. Whispers rippled. A young lady turning pale in such circumstances was always an object of intense interest. Just at that critical juncture, Matthew Bramble, freeing himself from a garrulous dowager, chanced to cast his gaze towards his niece. He saw her distress, the predatory gleam in the stranger's eye, and his blood, simmering with indignation, now boiled with righteous fury. "Lydia!" he boomed, his voice cutting through the polite hum. He strode forward with purpose. "Unhand my niece, sir?" "What is the meaning of this insolence?" McLean turned slowly, a sneer twisting his lips. "Ah, Mr. Bramble, the venerable guardian. Your niece and I, sir, were merely renewing an old acquaintance. One she seems keen to forget." He cast a malicious look at Lydia. Bramble saw red. "Acquaintance, you say? You, a known villain, a swindler, a heartless impostor. I warn you, sir, presume not upon the sanctity of this place to perpetrate your villainy." The crowd formed a gaping circle. Tabitha shrieked, half in alarm, half for attention. Jerry, ever composed, quickly moved to Lydia's side, offering his arm. McLean, emboldened by audacity, took a step closer to Bramble. "And you, old man, presume not upon your years to lecture me. There are matters between your niece and myself that are private." He leaned in, lowering his voice, "unless, of course, you wish the full sordid tale of Miss Melford's clandestine affections, her secret correspondence, and her scandalous elopement attempt, to be broadcast to all of Bath." This was a direct, vicious threat. Bramble's face, already flushed, darkened to an apoplectic hue. "You dog! You black-hearted rascal! How dare you cast such foul aspersions upon an innocent girl?" Without another word, Mr. Bramble, whose temper was formidable once roused, raised his walking stick, a sturdy oaken affair, and, with a sudden, unexpected lunge, aimed a blow squarely at McLean. The cane connected with a resounding thwack across his shoulder, as McLean dodged the head blow. A collective gasp went through the crowd. A woman screamed. McLean staggered back stunned, his bravado giving way to fury. He clutched his shoulder, his eyes blazing. "You antiquated fool! You'll pay for that!" Before McLean could retaliate, Jerry, quick as a flash, stepped decisively between them, hand gripping his sword hilt. "Sir," he said to McLean, his voice steady, "I advise you most strongly to withdraw. You have caused enough distress and scandal. Further action will not be tolerated." McLean, seeing Jerry's determined stance, Bramble's fury, and the murmuring crowd, weighed his options. With a final, venomous glare at Lydia, promising retribution, and a muttered curse, he turned abruptly and melted back into the crowd, swallowed by the assembly's anonymity. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by Lydia's nervous breathing. Bramble, still trembling, put a protective arm around his niece. "Are you harmed, my dear? Did that villain dare to?" Lydia shook her head, tears streaming freely down her face, not from physical pain, but from the raw wound of humiliation and terror. The evening, which had begun with fragile hope, had devolved into a public spectacle, her private sorrow exposed. "Let us leave this den of iniquity," Bramble declared, his voice still hoarse with anger. "This entire town is a snare, a trap for the unwary and the innocent." And so, with Lydia leaning heavily on Jerry, and Tabitha still exclaiming about the damage to their reputation and her gown, the Bramble party made a hasty, ignominious retreat from the Grand Assembly. The fateful party. It had indeed lived up to its name. For in that single terrible confrontation, the illusion of Bath's genteel society had been shattered for Lydia, revealing the cruel underbelly of her past. Her youthful dreams had collided violently with harsh reality, exposing vulnerabilities that would now surely be exploited. And for Mr. Bramble, it solidified his conviction that the world, particularly the fashionable urban world, was a cesspool of deceit and danger, where only constant vigilance could protect those he held dear. The expedition, once a quest for health, had truly become a perilous journey through the treacherous minefield of human nature, and this night had merely been the most explosive step yet. The shadow of McLean, the persistent specter of deceit, would undoubtedly loom large over their path ahead. Chapter 6. The Midnight Ride 7.344 Chi Letter 1EF1. The chill of the autumn night had long since descended upon us, wrapping the Bath Road in a cloak of impenetrable black. Our coach, laden with the anxieties and eccentricities of the Bramble household, rumbled onward, its progress marked by the rhythmic creak of springs and the distant jingle of harness. Uncle Matthew, ever sensitive to the drafts of the night air, was muffled in his greatcoat, occasionally grumbling about the state of the turnpikes, whilst Aunt Tabitha, perched rigidly beside him, muttered incantations against highwaymen and other perils known only to her febrile imagination. Lydia, poor child, huddled in a corner, her delicate frame trembling less from cold than from a general apprehension of the world beyond her sheltered ken. I, Jury Melford, found myself half dozing, lulled by the monotonous rhythm, yet ever alert to the unfolding drama of our travels. We had left the confines of Bath, that fashionable purgatory of vapors and vanities, intending to reach our next posting by morning. Humphry Clinker, our newfound postilion, sat astride one of the horses, a silhouette against the barely discernible stars, his humble frame betraying nothing of the remarkable spirit within. He had been a peculiar acquisition, this Clinker, a raw country lad, discovered in the stable yard, bearing a striking resemblance to a certain esteemed member of our party, a resemblance which, I confess, often stirred a mischievous glint in my eye. Yet, his devotion to Uncle Matthew was absolute, and his quiet competence had already begun to disarm even Aunt Tabitha's most fervent prejudices. "Are we far, Clinker?" Uncle Matthew's voice, raspy with fatigue, broke the relative silence. "Not so far, Your Honor," from the Bell and Crown, Clinker's voice, surprisingly deep and steady for one of his station, carried back to us. "Another league, perhaps." Just as the words settled into the night, a new sound, sharp and unwelcome, cut through the quiet, a whistle, piercing and close. My blood ran cold. Aunt Tabitha let out a stifled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth, whilst Lydia whimpered, shrinking further into the cushions. Uncle Matthew swore under his breath, a low guttural sound of impotent rage. "Stand and deliver." The cry, coarse and menacing, erupted from the darkness ahead, followed by the clatter of hooves and the gleam of metal. Two figures, shrouded and masked, materialized as if from the very fabric of the night, pistols glinting ominously. "Robbers!" shrieked Aunt Tabitha, her voice scaling heights previously unknown. "We're undone, undone. Silence, Tabitha," Uncle Matthew commanded, though his own voice trembled. "What do you want, you scoundrels?" One of the masked men, the taller of the two, spurred his horse alongside our coach window, his pistol pointed directly at my uncle. "Your money, your watches, your jewels! And be quick about it, old man, or this shall be your last journey." My hand instinctively went to the hilt of my sword, but a moment's reflection cautioned me. We were outnumbered, and their weapons were clearly superior. Lydia had fainted clean away, her head lolling against the seat, a spectacle of delicate distress. Aunt Tabitha, meanwhile, was fumbling frantically at her pockets, muttering about her family heirlooms with a bizarre blend of terror and avarice. It was then, in that moment of despair and helplessness, that a transformation occurred. Humphry Clinker, who moments before had been merely our postilion, seemed to swell in stature. With a sudden, astonishing burst of speed and agility, he leapt from his horse, not towards us for protection, but asterisk at asterisk the nearest highwayman. "Hold, ye knaves," he cried, his voice no longer the humble servant's, but a clarion call of righteous fury. "Would ye trouble honest folk on the king's highway?" The highwayman, caught entirely off guard by this unexpected assailant from below, let out a grunt of surprise as Clinker, with a strength I would not have believed possible, wrestled the pistol from his grasp. There was a flurry of limbs, a grunt, and the sound of a heavy fall as the ruffian tumbled from his saddle, landing with a sickening thud in the dirt. The second highwayman, momentarily stunned by the sudden turn of events, hesitated. But Clinker was not one to dally. Seizing the fallen pistol, he leveled it at the remaining brigand with an astonishing coolness. "And you, sirrah? Do you mean to join your companion in the dust, or will you take your leave?" The highwayman, clearly discomfited by Clinker's unexpected prowess and the sight of his colleague groaning on the ground, cast a nervous glance at the weapon. He turned his horse abruptly, giving a frustrated curse, and vanished into the darkness, leaving us in a stunned silence broken only by the whimpering of the fallen rogue. Clinker, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps, stood over the disarmed ruffian, the pistol still clutched in his hand, a figure of surprising authority. "On your feet, ye dog! And tell me, by what right do ye waylay travelers?" Uncle Matthew, recovering from his initial shock, peered out the window, his eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning admiration. "Good heavens, Clinker! What a fellow you are! Did you fell him with your bare hands?" "I merely disarmed him, Your Honor," Clinker replied, though a flush of exertion now painted his cheeks. He was not expecting a Christian to defend himself. I quickly dismounted, drawing my sword, though the immediate danger had passed. "Remarkable, Clinker, truly remarkable. We are all indebted to you." Aunt Tabitha, having revived herself, now shrieked anew, not in fear, but in a peculiar mix of awe and possessiveness. "My jewels! Are my jewels safe? Oh, the brave, brave lad! He saved us from ruin!" She eyed Clinker with a look I had never seen before, a blend of wonder and calculating appraisal. It was clear that the humble postilion, in a single audacious act, had risen significantly in her esteem, not least for safeguarding her earthly possessions. Lydia, slowly regaining consciousness, opened her eyes to the sight of Clinker, still holding the pistol, his figure now haloed by the pale moonlight. A faint blush touched her cheeks, a shy acknowledgement of the hero who had sprung from their midst. Uncle Matthew, having surveyed the groaning highwayman and the general disarray, ordered Clinker to secure the fellow and then to reload the pistol. "Upon my honor, Clinker, you have shown more courage and conduct than any man of my acquaintance." "You are a treasure, sir, a veritable treasure!" His usual grumbling had been replaced by a genuine warmth, a profound gratitude that spoke volumes. The incident, rather than merely a tale of peril averted, had served as a stark revelation, a testament to the unexpected heroism found in the most unassuming of places. It was a midnight ride indeed, but one that illuminated not merely the darkness of the road, but the inherent worth and surprising capabilities of a simple, honest soul, forever altering the dynamics of the Bramble expedition. The dangers of the highway had, paradoxically, brought a sense of security and a new understanding to our peculiar traveling party. The journey, fraught with peril, had just gained its unexpected guardian angel. Chapter 7. The Unsolved Mystery. 7.754 Chai Tail Letter 1 EF1 My dearest Sir Watkin, it is with a spirit somewhat chastened by the relentless caprice of human fortune, and a constitution still smarting from the trials of provincial accommodation, that I take up my pen to recount the latest vexation visited upon our traveling party. Indeed, were it not for the singular amusement derived from observing the myriad expressions of folly and indignation among my companions, I dare say I should have long since succumbed to a fit of the spleen. Our journey, having departed from the dubious comforts of Bath, has led us through a landscape alternately charming and dreary, until we found ourselves, by sheer dint of necessity, ensconced in an establishment I clept the Boar's Head, a name which, upon closer inspection of its inhabitants, seemed less a matter of heraldry and more a plain description of their countenances. The air within was thick with the aroma of stale ale and unwashed wool, and the very floorboards groaned beneath the weight of years and accumulated grime, protesting, one might imagine, the perpetual imposition of uncivilized foot traffic. It was upon the morning following our arrival, a morning heralded by the clamor of geese and the acrid smoke of peat fires, that the domestic tranquility, already a precarious commodity in our party, was utterly shattered. My aunt, Miss Tabitha Bramble, whose fastidious nature is well known to you, sir, emerged from her chamber with a visage that would have curdled new milk, her cap askew, and her voice pitched to a register that might have shattered the very crystal in the parlor, had there been any. "Robbed," she shrieked, her hand clutching at her bosom as if to prevent her heart from making a dramatic escape. "Plundered, despoiled, my locket, sir, my precious locket, gone, vanished from my very dressing table, as if spirited away by some infernal imp." Now, this locket, a bauble of no inconsiderable antiquity, was a relic of some sentimental value to my aunt, being, as I gathered from countless repetitions, a gift from a certain Captain Grano, a suitor of her youthful days, whose ardor, she maintained, had been of a most singular and persistent kind, despite his unfortunate habit of falling headlong into every available ditch. The locket itself, a rather ornate piece of tarnished silver containing a lock of the said captain's hair, which I suspect to have been pilfered from a stable boy, held a peculiar sway over her affections, surpassing, perhaps, even her regard for her faithful spaniel, Choo Choo. My uncle, Mr. Matthew Bramble, who had been attempting to digest a surprisingly resilient piece of bacon, merely grunted, supposing it a misplaced trifle. "Compose yourself, Tabitha," he enjoined, his usual equanimity strained. "You have doubtless mislaid it beneath a coil of your own hairpins, or perhaps it has slipped into the nether regions of your reticule." "Mislaid it, indeed," cried my aunt, her eyes darting about as if the very walls were accomplices to the crime. "I laid it upon the embroidered cloth with my own hands, sir. It was there, shining like a beacon of fidelity, when last I retired. Now it is gone, and I shall swear upon a stack of Bibles that some villainous knave, some pilfering poltroon, has made off with it. She then fixed her gaze, with an intensity that might have petrified a lesser man, upon poor Humphry Clinker, who stood by, looking as bewildered as a sheep in a haberdasher's shop, twisting his cap in his hands. "You fellow! You were the last in my chamber, bringing the hot water!" Humphry, whose honesty is as unblemished as his complexion, stammered, "Indeed, ma'am, but I did but set the kettle down, and instantly withdrew, fearing to disturb your slumber. I would sooner lop off my own hand than touch a thing that was not mine." My uncle, though often critical of Humphry's earnest simplicity, vouched for his integrity. "Peace, Tabitha," he interjected. "Humphry is no thief. His piety, if nothing else, would forbid it. More likely it is one of these idle, shiftless wretches who people every inn in this accursed kingdom." He then summoned the landlord, a man whose face was a roadmap of conviviality and cunning, and whose eyes seemed to possess an uncanny ability to survey a room without ever truly meeting anyone's gaze. Jerry and I commenced a systematic search, overturning every cushion, peering beneath every rug, and even venturing into the dark recesses beneath the bed, where we unearthed naught but a collection of forgotten dust bunnies and a single petrified cheese rind. Lydia, meanwhile, whose tender sensibilities are ever prone to romantic embellishment, suggested that perhaps it was a mischievous sprite, or even a spectral hand, seeking to communicate some ancient truth. "Think, cousin," she whispered, her eyes wide, "might it not be a sign? A warning, perhaps, from Captain Grano's departed spirit, lamenting his lost love." This hypothesis, as you may imagine, was met with a snort of derision from my uncle, and a fresh torrent of lamentation from my aunt, who declared that if Captain Grano were to manifest, he ought to have manifested with her locket firmly clasped in his ethereal fist. Our examination of the inn staff proved equally fruitless. The chambermaid, a slatternly creature with a suspicious smudge upon her nose, swore by all that was holy she had seen nothing, her eyes darting like trapped sparrows. The stable boy, a surly youth whose pockets seemed suspiciously distended, produced only a handful of oats and a rusty nail. The landlord, with a practiced shrug, offered his condolences and suggested that perhaps my aunt had left the locket in her previous lodgings, a suggestion that only served to inflame her indignation further. My uncle, his patience having worn thinner than a worn-out shilling, paced the room, delivering a fulminating discourse on the decline of public honesty, the omnipresent thievery that plagued the high roads and the low, and the lamentable lack of proper constabulary in these remote parts. He declared that the age was rotten to its core, and that no honest traveler could hope to escape the clutches of villainy. We even pursued a brief red herring. A scullery maid was observed polishing a small, silvery object near the kitchen fire, causing my aunt to let out a triumphant shriek. But alas, it proved to be merely a particularly shiny spoon, recently liberated from the grasp of a stubborn pot, and the poor girl's subsequent fright and tears only added to the general confusion. By evening the locket remained unrecovered, its whereabouts as mysterious as the true intentions of a politician. My aunt was inconsolable, declaring the Boar's Head a den of thieves, and vowing to write to every magistrate in the land, demanding justice. My uncle, resigned to the loss, decided that further inquiry would only yield further frustration, and resolved that we should depart at the first light of dawn, leaving this particular enigma to the tender mercies of time and providence. Thus, Sir Watkin, we leave the Boar's Head not only minus a piece of tarnished silver, but also with a fresh testament to the inscrutable nature of human events. Was it a cunning thief, a careless servant, a mischievous child, or indeed, some supernatural agency that spirited away Miss Tabitha's treasured keepsake? The question hangs in the air, a persistent shadow over our journey, a small, perfectly formed mystery to ponder amidst the greater uncertainties of life. Perhaps, one day, the truth shall emerge, like a pearl from an oyster, but for now, it remains, to our everlasting chagrin, entirely unsolved. I remain, sir, your most devoted and perplexed servant, J. Melfa. Chapter 8. The power of a legend. The journey had brought Mr. Bramble's party to a secluded corner of Wales, a village cradled by ancient hills, its name, Pentre Effin, whispered with a certain reverence by the few locals they encountered on the winding roads. But as their carriage rumbled into the village square, an air of profound desolation hung heavy, thicker than the morning mist. Children's laughter was muted, and the faces of the villagers, etched with worry, were universally pale, some flushed with an unsettling fever. "Good heavens, Matthew!" Tabitha exclaimed, clutching her nostrils as if fending off contagion itself. "What pestilence is this? Are we to contract some rural ague for our troubles?" Mr. Bramble, ever the keen observer, nodded gravely. "More than an ague, Tabitha. There is sickness here, and a deep-seated fear. See how they avert their eyes from the communal well. Indeed, the villagers cast apprehensive glances towards a small, moss-grown stone wellspring at the edge of the square, usually the heart of village life. Humphry Clinker, who had been quietly attending to the horses, approached with a concerned brow. "Begging your honor's pardon, but I overheard talk. They speak of the fever of the deep well and blame it on the water, which they say has grown murky and tastes bitter these past weeks." An elderly woman, her hands gnarled and trembling, shuffled closer. "It is the curse," she rasped, her voice thin with fright. "A curse for Fen, our protector. 1,000 years ago, when plague ravaged these valleys, Saint Fen blessed this very well, and its waters brought healing. But now, the saint's spirit is angered. To disturb the well is to invite his full wrath." Her eyes darted towards Humphry, then back to the shadowed mouth of the well. "No man dares touch it now, save for fetching the poison draught." Matthew Bramble, though rational, felt a chill. "Superstition, my good woman, breeds fear, and fear weakens the body. The well is simply fouled, I presume." Humphry, however, listened with a peculiar devout intensity. His simple faith saw not mere folklore, but a call to duty. If it be the Lord's will and the well is fouled, then a good Christian man should clean it, not fear it, he declared, his voice firm, his gaze fixed on the troubled water. Jury Melford, observing his uncle's man, scribbled in his notebook. "Our Clinker, it seems, embodies a most peculiar blend of piety and profound practicality. A saint for the modern age, perhaps, albeit one who wields a shovel." Later that afternoon, armed with a stout rope, a bucket, and a borrowed shovel, Humphry walked towards the well. A knot of villagers, a mixture of awe and apprehension in their eyes, followed at a cautious distance. They watched in hushed silence as he knelt, offered a swift, silent prayer, and then, with surprising agility for a man of his build, secured the rope and lowered himself into the gloomy depths. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some clutched charms, others whispered appeals to Saint Fen, unsure if they were witnessing blasphemy or an act of divine courage. The elder woman, transfixed, her ancient eyes wide, swayed between fear and a nascent hope. Down in the cold, damp darkness, Humphry worked with an indefatigable spirit. The water was indeed thick with silt and decaying matter, a natural blockage, not a spiritual one, he surmised, but one that certainly explained the illness. With powerful strokes, he scooped out bucket after bucket of the foul-smelling sludge. It was back-breaking, unpleasant labor, but Humphry was driven by a conviction that bordered on the holy. He cleared the obstructions, scraped the moss from the stones, and ensured the spring at the bottom flowed unimpeded. Hours passed. The setting sun cast long shadows across the valley when, finally, Humphry called for the rope. He emerged, drenched and muddied, but his face held a serene, almost triumphant glow. "It is done," he announced, his voice raspy but clear. "The spring is clear. The water will flow clean again." As if responding to his words, a soft gurgle echoed from the well's depths. The turbid surface began to clear slowly, then more rapidly, until a shimmering, pure reflection of the twilight sky was visible. A collective gasp rose from the villagers. "Look," cried a young woman, pointing with a trembling hand. "It is clear! Saint Fen has answered." At that very moment, a child nearby, who had been languishing with fever in his mother's arms, stirred. His eyes, which had been glazed, now cleared, and he let out a weak but distinct cry for water. The mother, tears streaming down her face, rushed to the well, cupped her hands, and brought forth the pure draught. To the villagers, the coincidence was irrefutable. Humphry's act, already courageous, was now imbued with divine significance. He was not merely a strong, pious man who had cleaned a well, he was the earthly manifestation, the instrument, perhaps even the return, of their beloved Saint Fen. News of Saint Humphry spread like wildfire. By the time Mr. Bramble and Jury Melford approached, they found Humphry surrounded by a reverent crowd. Villagers knelt, some attempting to kiss his muddy hands, others offering humble gifts. Matthew Bramble, despite his rational bent, felt a profound emotion stir within him. He knew the well was cleared by honest labor, and the illness might have been on the wane, but the impact on the community was undeniable. Hope, which had withered, now bloomed anew. Jury, ever the detached chronicler, scratched intently in his notebook. "A remarkable phenomenon, uncle. The power of narrative, indeed. A good heart and a strong back, filtered through centuries of belief, can elevate a man to sainthood in a single afternoon. It illustrates, quite vividly, how profoundly legends shape the common mind, and how readily they are revived or reborn." Tabitha, though still skeptical of the saint title, conceded, "Well, the man has certainly done some good, I grant you. Better than sitting idle, unlike some others." Lydia, however, felt no cynicism, only pure, unadulterated pride. "He is a good man, uncle, and the Lord works through good men." Perhaps that is all a saint truly is. Mr. Bramble nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on Humphry, who despite the adoration remained humble, even a little embarrassed. "Perhaps, my dear. The enduring legend of Saint Ifen, the communal belief in a benevolent protector, created fertile ground. Humphry's practical actions were, through this lens, elevated to the miraculous. It is not always the deed itself, you see, but the interpretation of the deed that holds the greatest power. A legend, though born of the past, can not only endure, but can also empower the present, shaping reality by the sheer, unwavering force of its narrative. In Penter FN, the fever of the deep well began to recede, and with it the despair. The simple servant, Humphry Clinker, had become more than a man. He was a living testament to the power of a legend not just of old tales, but of human hope, simple goodness, and the profound ways in which belief can illuminate even the darkest of times. My dear reader, or rather, fellow traveler on this grand stage of life, lend me your ear for a spell, and let us converse upon a matter of peculiar human interest, that persistent, often exasperating, yet undeniably present companion each of us harbors within our very own horseman. Not a creature of flesh and bone, mind you, though its effects may well leave one feeling rather trampled, but rather that dominant humor, that peculiar distemper of the mind or body, that singular foible which rides roughshod over our better intentions and occasionally over the very peace of those who must endure our company. In the spirit of our journey with the estimable Bramble family, a voyage that, like life itself, is fraught with more than its share of unexpected inns, cooked victuals, and the occasional highwayman of the spirit, I propose we embark upon a modest expedition of our own, a 7-day action plan not for eradicating these internal riders entirely, for to wish a man quit of his very essence is often a fool's errand, but rather for understanding, managing, and perhaps even, by Jove, befriending them. For what is a man without his quirks? A mere shadow, a cipher, less interesting than a stale bun. Stree Day 1, the grand survey, identifying thy steeds. Cast your mind, if you will, to the venerable Matthew Bramble. Ah, a gentleman of feeling, of education, yet ever a slave to his delicate constitution, and a profound distaste for all things modern. His horseman, a potent brew of hypochondria, and a staunch misanthropy that colors every observation. The first step, my friends, is simply to see it, not to judge, not to rail against it, but to observe with the calm detachment of a naturalist studying a rare beetle. Is it a penchant for complaint, like Mr. Bramble? A fierce, unyielding pride, perhaps, like certain Highland chieftains we might recall? Or is it a soaring, often impractical romanticism, much like the gentle Lydia Melford, whose heart is ever aflutter with the least breath of sentiment? Take but a moment. A quiet afternoon, perhaps over a dish of tea, provided it is brewed precisely to your liking, of course, and pen down the chief characteristic that causes you, or others, the most frequent disquiet. Acknowledge its presence, give it a name, even a silly one, for to name a thing is to begin to master it. Day 2, the mirror of mirth, seeing thyself in others' eyes. Now that you have identified your own spirited beast, let us turn our gaze outwards. Consider the inimitable Tabitha Bramble. Her horseman, no doubt, a formidable charger indeed, is her relentless pursuit of matrimony, coupled with an unyielding parsimony that pinches every penny and often every nerve of those around her. How does her horseman, her ceaseless matrimonial machinations, reflect upon her brother, Matthew, or her niece, Lydia? Today's task is to observe, without rancor, how your own horseman might be perceived by your companions. For instance, young Jerry Melford, initially quick to judge his uncle's gloomy pronouncements, slowly comes to understand the true heart beneath the cantankerous exterior. Sometimes, the most potent insight comes not from introspection, but from observing the ripple effect of our own humors upon the tranquil or turbulent waters of society around us. Ask yourself, how might my actions, born of my horseman, appear to a candid friend, or even a casual acquaintance? The answer may be humbling, perhaps even amusing. Day 3, a small reinsman's tug, the gentle correction. Our horseman, however robust, is not entirely beyond our influence. Think of Mr. Bramble, for all his complaints about the noxious air of cities and the vulgarity of their inhabitants, occasionally finding genuine delight in a scenic prospect or a particularly engaging conversation. He does not banish his hypochondria, no, but for a moment, the reins are pulled ever so slightly. Today's action is simple: choose one small instance where your horseman typically dictates your immediate reaction, and for that single instance, choose otherwise. If your horseman is prone to immediate irritation, offer a polite smile instead. If it demands meticulous order, allow a single trifling imperfection to pass unnoticed. The victory lies not in eradication, but in demonstration of agency. It is a whisper of independence to your dominant humor, a subtle reminder that you are still in the saddle, even if your steed has a mind of its own. Day 4. The grand gallop of laughter embracing the absurdity. Oh, to be serious all the time about our own failings. What a wearying prospect. Let us turn our attention to the delightful Winifred Jenkins, whose horseman is undoubtedly a spirited steed of malapropism and social ambition, ever eager to appear more refined than circumstance allows. Her letters, a veritable carnival of misconstrued words, are a testament to the endearing, often uproarious, side of human folly. Today, we must learn to laugh, not with cruelty, but with a warm, appreciative chuckle at the very antics of our own horsemen. For when we can find humor in our peculiarities, they lose some of their power to vex us. Imagine your horseman as a character in a grand comedy, playing its part with delightful earnestness. What amusing predicaments does it lead you into? What ludicrous pronouncements does it inspire? A hearty laugh, my friends, is a powerful elixir against the sting of self-reproach. Day 5. The unlikely stable mate seeking the aid of another. Sometimes, our horseman, being a creature of habit, requires a gentle nudge from an external source. Consider how Humphry Clinker, with his simple honesty, his steadfast devotion, and his natural goodness, unwittingly serves as a balm to the various distempers of the Bramble household. He is a stabilizing force, a quiet counterpoint to their eccentricities. Today, identify someone in your life, a friend, a family member, even a well-regarded acquaintance who, by their very presence or their particular wisdom, seems to offer a quiet corrective or a steadying hand to your horseman. It might be someone who simply listens without judgment, or someone whose practical common sense grounds your fanciful flights. Seek their counsel, or simply bask in their steady influence. Sometimes, merely the shared journey makes the horseman seem less formidable. Day 6. The winding road changing the scenery for the soul. The Bramble expedition itself is a testament to the power of new surroundings. The change of air, the different faces, the varied landscapes all conspire to loosen the grip of ingrained habits. Mr. Bramble, for all his grumbling, finds himself invigorated by the waters of Bath and the sights of Scotland. Lydia's romantic notions are both fueled and challenged by new admirers and experiences. Today, if possible, step outside your usual routine. Even a short walk through an unfamiliar part of your town, a visit to a new establishment, or simply engaging in a novel activity can serve to distract your horseman, to momentarily unseat it from its accustomed perch. A fresh perspective, gained from a change of scenery or a novel undertaking, can reveal that your horseman, for all its bluster, is often a creature of familiar pathways. Day 7. The harmonious ride, integrating thy companionisk. And so, my friends, we arrive at the 7th day, not with the unrealistic expectation that your horseman has vanished into the mists of morning, but rather with a new understanding, a quieter acceptance. Your horseman, be it hypochondria or vanity, romantic fancy or rigid parsimony, is undeniably a part of your journey. It has shaped you, perhaps even protected you in its own peculiar way. The goal is not to dismount it completely, but to learn to ride in concert with it. To know when to grant it rein, and when to apply a firm but gentle hand, to acknowledge its presence without letting it entirely dictate your course. Consider how the various members of the Bramble family, through their collective experiences and eventual settlements, don't necessarily shed their fundamental natures, but learn to temper them, to understand them in relation to others, and ultimately, to find a form of contentedness with their peculiarities, not despite them. This final day is for reflection, for granting grace to your enduring companion, your unique and utterly irreplaceable horseman, and for recognizing that in its very particularity lies a part of what makes you, well, you. Go forth, then, with this newfound wisdom, and may your ride be ever more harmonious. Friends, gather round, pull your chairs closer, for tonight we shall delve into a curious chapter indeed. One titled, intriguingly, Summary 3 Truths from Sleepy Hollow. Now, before your minds wander to spectral horsemen and pumpkin heads, let us clarify. This Sleepy Hollow is no quaint New York glen, haunted by fables. No, this is a sleepy hollow of the human spirit, a quiet corner of consciousness, a state of complacent slumber that our traveling companions, the most peculiar Bramble family, invariably stumbled through, and sometimes were rudely awakened from, during their grand, rather agitated expedition across Great Britain. Imagine, if you will, not a physical valley, but a metaphorical dell within the human psyche, a place where routines become ruts, where opinions ossify into prejudices, and where the world is viewed through a lens clouded by habit and expectation. This is the Sleepy Hollow that Smollett's glorious epistolary journey, the expedition of Humphry Clinker, so brilliantly dissects. And from this metaphorical slumber, three profound truths emerge, shimmering into clarity as our characters are jolted, jumbled, and ultimately transformed by the sheer, unadulterated chaos of life on the road. Our first truth: the hollow of facades and phallus desk in this metaphorical Sleepy Hollow all seem tranquil on the surface, a smooth veneer of decorum and good taste. Yet, beneath it, the currents of human vanity, self-delusion, and often sheer folly ran swift and deep. Consider the fashionable watering holes of Bath, where our journey commences. Here, society paraded its ailments and its pretensions with equal vigor. The invalids, real and imagined, bathed not just in mineral waters but in the approving gaze of their peers, each convinced of their unique afflictions and the profound importance of their social standing. Our characters themselves were not immune. Mrs. Tobias Bramble, for instance, clung to the fading vestiges of her youthful charms with an almost tragicomic desperation. Her pursuit of a husband, her carefully curated ailments, her rigid adherence to a self-conceived gentility, these were but facades erected in her personal Sleepy Hollow, obscuring the genuine, if rather formidable, woman beneath. Even the grand pronouncements of the Bath physicians and the earnest solicitations of the card sharpers were but elaborate theatricals, designed to maintain an illusion, to keep the populace comfortably asleep in their social roles. The expedition, however, pulls back this curtain, revealing the ludicrousness of these self-imposed illusions, the hollowness behind the grandest pronouncements, and the often petty motives lurking behind the most polished smiles. We see the world as it truly is, a grand spectacle of human beings attempting to navigate life with varying degrees of sincerity and success, often relying on masks to feel secure. The journey forces a reckoning, a disrobing of these costumes, whether they are the latest fashions or the most cherished prejudices. Our second truth: the hollow of inflexible minds. If the first truth unveiled the follies we project outwards, the second illuminates the stubbornness we harbor within. Our travelers, and many they encountered, were often content in their own sleepy hollows of prejudice, where established notions lay undisturbed, like dust motes in a sunbeam. Matthew Bramble, our esteemed misanthrope, was perhaps the most comfortably ensconced. His letters are a veritable symphony of complaint, a constant railing against all things modern, all things urban, all things that deviated from his cherished rural idyll. The very air of London was a fog of filth, the customs of its denizens degenerate, and every innovation a step closer to perdition. Tabitha, too, resided in a similar hollow, her mind a fortress of fixed ideas regarding propriety, economy, and the absolute necessity of securing a husband. She judges all by the narrow yardstick of her own provincial upbringing and fiercely held convictions. Even the seemingly more open-minded Lydia and Jury often fall prey to initial biases, only slowly learning to see beyond superficialities. This truth reveals how deeply ingrained our preconceptions can be, how comfortable we are in our mental sleepy hollows, where familiar ideas circulate unchallenged. The constant movement of the expedition, however, acts as a relentless agitator. It forces encounters with myriad characters, from the eccentric Lieutenant Lismahago, whose stoic pragmatism challenges many social norms, to the earnest, good-hearted Humphry Clinker himself, whose humble origins initially provoked disdain from some. These interactions chip away at the walls of prejudice, if not dismantling them entirely, then at least introducing cracks through which new perspectives might filter. It's a slow, often painful awakening, but an awakening nonetheless, proving that even the most obstinate minds can be stirred, even if grudgingly, by the undeniable force of lived experience. Our third truth: the hollow's awakening, transformation, and connection. But even the deepest slumber must break. The journey, with its incessant jostling and exposure to diverse human specimens, stirred the inhabitants of these spiritual sleepy hollows. For some, like young Lydia, It was a gentle unfolding, a blossoming into love and self-awareness. Her initial romantic woes, born of youthful infatuation and social obstacles, are eventually resolved through a series of discoveries that elevate her beloved Wilson to the estimable Mr. Denison, revealing a depth of character and an unexpected lineage that transforms her world. Perhaps the most dramatic awakening is that of Humphry Clinker himself. From an unpromising, illiterate stable boy, prone to fervent Methodist outbursts, he evolves through service and circumstance. His inherent goodness, loyalty, and surprising practical talents shine through, culminating in the astonishing revelation of his true parentage, elevating him from a sleepy anonymity to a place of respect and belonging within the very family he served. And even Tabitha, in her persistent, unyielding way, finds her awakening. Her relentless pursuit of matrimony, seemingly a futile exercise in the hollow of her own stubbornness, finally yields the most improbable, yet undeniably affectionate, union with the long-winded, battle-scarred Lismahago. Their marriage, a testament to companionship found in the most unexpected corners, proves that love, in its myriad forms, can penetrate even the most fortified sleepy hollows of the heart. Even Matthew Bramble, for all his grumbling and misanthropy, finds a degree of peace and contentment by the journey's end. His family, once a source of constant irritation, now offers him solace and companionship. The journey, despite his complaints, has broadened his perspective, softened his edges, and allowed him to find a genuine, if still cantankerous, happiness. So, as our metaphorical expedition concludes, we reflect on these three truths from our spiritual sleepy hollow. We learn that appearances are often deceptive, that human minds cling to prejudice with tenacious grip, but ultimately, that the human spirit possesses an extraordinary capacity for transformation, for genuine connection, and for an awakening that transcends the most comfortable of slumbers. Smollett, through his vibrant tapestry of characters and experiences, invites us not to fear the specters of a physical sleepy hollow, but to bravely confront the often unseen truths that lie dormant within our own hearts and minds, waiting to be stirred by the grand expedition of life itself. Ah, my fellow travelers, pause a moment now, as the last of Mr. Bramble's letters are folded, and the final flourish of Jerry's quill marks the conclusion of our grand tour. We have journeyed through the muddy byways and bustling cities of an 18th century Britain, not merely as distant observers, but as intimate companions to a most peculiar, endearing, and utterly unforgettable band of adventurers. Remember the cantankerous but ultimately tender-hearted Matthew Bramble, whose every complaint was but a thin veil over a deep well of affection and moral rectitude. Recall the indefatigable Tabitha, a woman of formidable will and unwavering matrimonial ambition, who, against all odds, found her own peculiar brand of happiness, and the sharp-witted, world-weary Lismahago, whose cynical pronouncements so often contained a grain of profound truth. Sweet Lydia, whose romantic heart blossomed amidst the chaos, and sensible Jerry, whose observant eye chronicled it all for our enlightenment. But above all, remember Humphry Clinker, the humble, earnest, and astonishingly pure-hearted servant, whose unexpected arrival and even more astonishing lineage unraveled the carefully constructed world of the Bramble household. He was the catalyst, the quiet earthquake, proving that goodness, true worth, and even nobility can spring from the most unassuming origins. He reminded us that the greatest revelations often lie hidden beneath the dust of daily life, waiting for an open heart to discover them. Their expedition was more than a mere ramble across the British Isles. It was an odyssey of the spirit, a grand tour of human nature itself. They navigated the treacherous shoals of social expectation, the baffling currents of class distinction, and the ever-shifting sands of personal identity. Through their eyes, we glimpsed the foibles of fashion, the absurdities of society, and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. We laughed at their predicaments, we sympathized with their struggles, and perhaps, in the quiet corners of our own minds, we recognized echoes of our own journeys, our own aspirations, and our own peculiar family dynamics. Now, as the curtain falls on their narrative, a new chapter begins, not for them, but for us. This is not merely the end of a story, it is the beginning of a legend. A legend woven not from the grand tapestries of kings and queens, nor the epic sagas of battlefield heroes, but from the vibrant, sometimes frayed, sometimes gloriously iridescent threads of everyday life, of kindness found in unexpected corners, of human folly observed with a gentle, knowing smile, of love that blossoms amidst pique and prejudice, of profound discovery, and ultimately, of hard-won self-acceptance. It is a legend of ordinary people living lives that, through their authentic telling, become extraordinary, simply by being themselves, flawed, magnificent, and glorious in equal measure. Their story, in its raw humanity, transcends its era and takes its place among the timeless narratives that illuminate the very heart of what it means to be human. And so, my dear friends, as the echoes of their final adventures begin to fade, we arrive at a pivotal moment, a turning of the page that is not an ending, but a resounding call to action and invitation, indeed, a challenge to join the legend. To become not just a reader, but a participant in the ongoing, ever-unfolding narrative of human experience, guided by the lamp lit by these remarkable travelers. What does it mean to join such a legend? It does not mean to pack your trunks and set off on a literal journey through 18th century Britain. No, the call is far more profound, far more personal. It is an invitation to embrace the spirit of their expedition in your own life, in your own time. Firstly, it is a call to observe with a keen eye. Like Jerry Melford, train your gaze upon the world around you. Look beyond the superficial, past the polished facades and the noisy clamor. Seek out the genuine article, the authentic gesture, the subtle ironies and profound beauties that often hide in plain sight. Question the prevailing wisdom, much as Bramble questioned the doctors and the fads of his day. What social currents are truly shaping your world? What hidden stories lie beneath the surface of everyday encounters? Secondly, it is a call to embrace the unexpected. Who among them anticipated the transformative power of Humphry Clinker? Who could have foretold the delightful turns of fate that brought marriages and reconciliation? Life, much like their journey, is seldom a straight road. It is filled with detours, surprises, and serendipitous encounters. Be open to them. Allow the unexpected to challenge your assumptions, to broaden your horizons, and to lead you to revelations about yourself and the world you inhabit. Find your own Clinker moment, that surprising person, that unforeseen event, that humble truth that reshapes your perspective entirely. Thirdly, it is a call to cultivate true connections. The Bramble family, for all their squabbles, were bound by an undeniable, if sometimes exasperating, love. Their journey forced them into closer proximity, compelling them to confront each other's quirks and ultimately, to deepen their bonds. In an age of fleeting interactions, seek out genuine connection. Listen deeply, speak kindly, and extend empathy even to those who may seem, at first glance, to be the most trying. For it is in these connections that the true richness of life is found, and it is through them that our own legends are shared and understood. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it is a call to embark on your own expedition of self-discovery. Just as each character in Smollett's narrative underwent a subtle, yet significant, transformation, so too are we constantly on a journey of becoming. What are the prejudices you carry, the assumptions you hold, the aspects of yourself yet to be fully explored? Dare to venture beyond your comfort zone, to challenge your own limitations, and to discover the depths of your own character. Your life, right here and now, is your own grand expedition. The legend of Humphry Clinker and his eccentric family endures not just because it is a brilliantly crafted story, but because it holds a mirror to our collective human experience. It reminds us that every life, no matter how seemingly ordinary, is ripe with adventure, humor, and the potential for profound self-discovery. So take up your imaginary quills, my friends. Tune your senses to the world around you. Open your hearts to its complexities and its charms. Your own pages are waiting to be written. Your own legend is waiting to unfold. Join them, not as passive readers, but as active participants in the ongoing, vibrant story of humanity. For the expedition, in its truest, deepest sense, never truly ends.